Well, hey everyone, and welcome to another part of the Scriptable Object Skills tutorial. In last episode, we got the body slam all up and going. Go ahead and take a look at what we got so far. You can come in here and you can just move body slam in the direction. It has a reset back. That's really neat. You can hit the cube. We notice that it goes through the cube, but we don't want to do that. We actually want to bounce back when we hit something. So there's a couple things we need to do. So what we're going to do first is let's go ahead into our physical attack script. Okay. No, not player controller. Oh, it's right here. Okay. So in the physical attack, what we want to do is we're going to make a bool called public bool allow to trigger. And why are we doing this? Well, let me show you something neat. First of all, when you're physically attacking, you're legitimately making the decision to attack, okay? If you come into here as the player has the physical attack script attached to it, okay? By default, it just says, hey, on trigger, enter. So if I take the player and you just happen to be walking around your world, okay? So let's go ahead and like we're moving the player around, okay? We're walking around the scene, doing some cool stuff. We come over here. No, we don't want to rotate. We want position. So like we'd come into here, we're gonna move this way, la da 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 da, we're walking. You will notice as soon as we actually bump in to this cube, he takes damage. If we bump into it again, he takes damage. We don't want him to take, we don't want the enemies to take damage just because the player walks into them. Like that's not a physical attack, that's just a walk. He's just walking. Like what are you doing? So allow to trigger is going to be a boolean we're going to go ahead and do some things with inside of here to say, hey, are we allowed to trigger inside of here to take the damage? So what we'll do is we'll say if we're allowed to trigger, then we're going to go ahead and check for this and do damage. So basically, if this is false and you walk into something, it's not going to matter. It's going to say, are you allowed to trigger? No, this isn't a physical attack. The player's just walking into someone. No big deal. You know, don't trigger any damage. That's essentially what this entire script would end up doing. So what we have to do now in the body slam script, so we can actually test that out and I can prove it to you. Remember, he was taking damage before. Allow to trigger is false. Okay, so if we come into here, allow the trigger set to false. We can come into here, we can walk all into that cube we want. It ain't gonna do nothing. See? Not unless this trigger was activated. So we know, okay, we're attacking. Bam! You know, and now we're not attacking. Come into here, we're just walking by him, nothing happens. And that's what we want, okay? Now the trick is we need to access and change this allow to trigger event. How do we do that? Oh, we'll go into here. We're going to go into body slam. We're going to say, okay, so when we press the E key or whenever we call this use function, we know we are going to attack. So we will grab our physical attack reference and we'll do allow the trigger. We're going to set it to true. So we can allow them to, so we are now in a physical attack state. We're going to come down here. We're going to do the coroutine. However, it never sets it to false. So if we come into here, nope, this is what I want. Q. It means if we come into here and we press the E button, it's going to be set to true. The trigger's false. Okay. Come here. We attack. Bam. Its trigger's true. But we're not attacking anymore. We're just going to walk to him and say, hey, man, I'm so sorry for hitting you. It won't happen again. And you're going to be walking into this man, still going to be taking damage. See? Like, you don't want that. Like, you got to reset it. It needs to know, like, hey, is this a physical attack or is it not? So it's going to be set, bam, it's a physical attack. Well, when the attack is done, we need to come into here and set the physical attack to false. So it's no longer attacking. So we'll come into here, physical attack dot allow to trigger set to false. So that's cool. So once we reset, it's going to set allow trigger to back. But it doesn't solve the problem about going and hitting the person. So what we want to do is, we're saying right here, hey, while the distance is between less than the range, go ahead and keep moving towards them. That's essentially what this is saying. But what we should also say is, hey, while physical attack dot trigger is true, while you're allowed to attack someone and you're within range, keep moving. So what's going to happen is you're going to press the E button. You're going to allow it to trigger. You're going to keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. When you are out of the range, it's going to say, okay, are we allowed to trigger? We are, but we're not in range anymore. So it's going to stop this, come down here, set trigger to false, and it's going to set your position. Well, if allowed to trigger, bam, trigger enter. Yep. That's what we want. So, I believe there's one other step to it. Right, and there's one other thing left. So, right now we're going to say allow trigger, allow trigger. Well, what if it hits? So when you come into here and you're allowed to trigger, whether you hit something and it takes damage or not, we're going to allow trigger set to false, which means, hey, you entered something, you were allowed to hit it. If it can take damage, it will. If it can't take damage or can take damage, it doesn't matter. You're not allowed to trigger anymore. You're no longer in a physical attack state. You're not physically attacking anymore. At this point, you're just moving around. The attack is over, essentially. So when you come into body slam here, now it's going to say, hey, while physical attack not allowed to trigger, yes, you're in range, keep walking. Well, as you walked in here, hit a trigger, hit a damageable. It's not null. It takes damage. Now you can't trigger. It's going to finish out this loop and say, hey, physical attack allowed to trigger. Oh, it's false. So this is going to break, come down here, and then it's going to go ahead and set this to false. It'll set it to false again, but the only reason we're doing that is in case it keeps going and going and going for 5 range, it'll just set it by default. And I'll show you what I mean. So remember how we set this, we set it to 7, right? So it's got a pretty long range. So if you see the allow to trigger, it should, when I press the E button and it starts moving, it should check, and then it's going to run out of range, reset, and then be unchecked. Okay? Now here, what's going to happen is I'm going to press E, it's going to hit this object, bounce back, and it's going to be back to false again. So press E, it's going to check, it's going to hit this, set to false, bounce back. This is what's going to happen. Bam. And that's what ended up happening right there. So as you can see, it just bounces back. It doesn't allow it. See how it goes in? Boom. Boom. It doesn't allow it to go completely through the cube anymore. So if you have like a range of 10, that thing is just going to, it won't go through it. It's going to hit the first one instead of going through them. So that's what we had wanted there. Let's see, what else is there? We got the physical attack taken care of. And that is the body slam. Okay. Yeah, there's one other thing I wanted to show you guys. It's going to be in the body slam and the fireball script. And I'm going to show you what it is. So, right now, the player has a rigid body that's not kinematic, okay? Well, let's go ahead and switch this up. He's not going to have the body slam anymore. He's going to do fireball. Okay? And we'll just set the skill pool and spawn back, okay? So we'll just do this. So now he's going to shoot fireballs when we press E. Watch what happens to the player when I shoot that fireball. Well, that's some kind of madness. So what happens is the box collider that's on the player is on. Like the rigid bodies are the rigid bodies are conflicting between the fireball's rigid body and the box collider that's on the player. So the issue that we're having is this player has a rigid body that isn't kinematic. So that means it can be applied forces. So that means like when we go into the body slam script, you see how we use rigid body add force? Because it's not kinematic, the forces can be used on it. It can move. If this object was kinematic, we couldn't use a force on it. Like we wouldn't be able to use the body slam skill. Like we wouldn't be able to do this. We come over here to player. We're going to give him back the body slam skill. And then we're going to come into here. And he's going to be the player again. We're going to come into here. Let's set him to kinematic, which means he can't move. When I press the E button, he's not going to move. Because when it's kinematic, it's technically a rigid body that's not allowed to move. Forces can't act on it. So like I'm pressing the E key and nothing's happening. So, but that's what we want to happen when we're shooting a projectile, because we don't want the player to interfere with the projectile. So we'll set it back to fireball, set the skill spawn back. We'll save it. And we're going to set the kinematic to off. Okay, by default, it'll be off. We want the player to move. Well, when we're shooting a projectile, so like when we come into the fireball script, what we're going to do is when we're in the body slam script, we're going to come into here and we're going to do also rigid body dot is kinematic, and we're going to set the kinematic to false, which means this is going to be a physical attack, so I'm going to need the player to move. So it'll move. And then after the entire attack is done, whether he attacks and misses or hits something, we're going to want to reset it back to true. So that means is kinematic. The player cannot be acted upon by forces. So is kinematic to true, is kinematic to false. We're attacking physically, I can move. We're done the attack, I can't move anymore. True. In the so we want that in the, so by default the player is needed. So by default is kinematic is off, obviously. So we should be able to do bam. Okay, cool. So that's what we needed. So we need to make sure whenever we're in the fireball script, we get the let's see, we need to get this to the body. What we can do with that is inside of here, we're going to do a coroutine enumerator for enable collider. I'll show you why in a second we're doing this. It'll be a box collider, and then it'll be BC. The reason we're doing this is because we're going to do yield return to wait for seconds 0.25f. And then we're going to do bc.enabled to true. So what is happening here? Well, like I said, remember how they were colliding? They won't collide when you go into the fireball prefab. We're going to go to fireball prefab, and we're going to set its box collider off by default. Because if this is on, okay, so the box collider is off. If I go and shoot the fireball now, the player is not going to move. See? But the fireball doesn't collide either. The fireball's box collider needs to be active for it to activate the physics on the collision between the cube. But if the box collider is on, it interferes with the rigid body that's on the player, and so the player just starts moving all over the place. So the way we solve that is we make sure that the player is going to end up having is kinematic set to true whenever you're shooting an object, while at the same time having the fireball's collision box on, because they all collide with one another. So what we're going to do is, after 0.25 seconds, after a quarter of a second, we're going to enable the box collider to true. So that means what's going to happen is we're going to set the default to the box collider as off for a fireball, as a projectile. We're going to shoot it. Once it's shot, it's going to wait 0.25 seconds, and then it's going to reactivate the collider. So that means that collider will not interact with the rigid body that's on the player, but it will also be able to go and attack. It'll also be able to inflict damage and collide with other objects. So what we would do is we would come into here, do clone skill prefab dot get component, the projectile, we're just doing that because we have to have a mono behavior to be able to run a coroutine. It's a bit convoluted. You can go about this a different way for sure. This is just to make something simple for you. And then we're going to do clone skill prefab dot get component box collider. So what's happening here? We're literally just grabbing a mono behavior of some sort, so we can call the coroutine and say, hey, start this coroutine enable collider, and we want to enable the collider that is on the player, that is on the prefab. That's all we're doing, literally. Matter of fact, you can just do this. Like, you can do private box collider, and then come into here, and just when the fireball instance deploys, we can just do this over here. We can literally just come into here, enable collider, box collider, like that. All we got to do is just come up to here. When we instantiate the prefab, we're going to get the box collider from it and set it the box collider. That's initially what would happen. Grab the box collider. So grab box collider to enable for collisions. That's what would happen. Grab a box collider there. Come down here. We're going to grab the component projectile, start the coroutine, and then do this. So what's going to happen now, it's going to shoot. So what's going to happen now is it's going to shoot a fireball. Notice how the player is not affected by, like, it can be affected by forces. It's not kinematic. So if the box collider was on for the fireball, it would drag the rigid body on the player. The player would move. But we got that set to where the fireball collider's off. And then it's going to reset. So notice how the box collider is this. Okay? And then now when we instantiate the cube, when we shoot this fireball, it's not gonna move the player at all. But it's gonna still hit the cube. Bam. See? That's how you do it. So let's see, we got taken care of all the different collision checks. We got the fireball. There's still the situation of having to switch that spawn location. Well, there's a bunch of ways you can do that. So we'll go ahead and work on it though, real quick. So you got the player. No matter what, we just want to put the player in here. It's that simple. So we can actually change spawn location name in the player controller, and then just do, we can just call it owner. Whoever owns the skill, it'll be the player. And all you gotta do is come into here and put owner. Well, let's make it lowercase and the right way. Well, just for this instance. There you go. So no matter what skill, you're going to get this. Well, you know Fireball has got to be. Because normally this would end up being a prefab, I would say. Because just the way your player is. You know your player would be this. It'll have a skill spawn for objects that are for projectiles. So we can actually name just like skill spawn. This would be like projectile spawn. So you know you have an object called projectile spawn. So then what you would do is you would grab the child object of it and just do player, and then you would do owner. It's going to be self. Which that didn't even have to be in there, because if you think about it, the player controller is going to be attached to a player. You can just do this.game object. You don't have to do owner. You can just do this.game object. But for clarity purposes, we'll do that real quick. Now in Fireball, we don't want it. We don't want the transform of the player. So what we want to do is we want to grab the game object of the projectile spawn. That's the game object we want. So what we would do is we would do object dot get component. Oh no, it would be get child object. Let's see. Grab the child. Just get component. We don't want the component in children. Object dot find child. Get child. No. In the transform dot child. Okay, get child. And then we can do get index. Returns a transform child by index. There's got to be another way to get that though. Oh my goodness. Let's see. Is there anything else? No. Okay, well for the sake of this one, we can get child. It's going to be child 0. We know the next child. And it's getting the transform. Well, that's even better. We can just do this. Bam. That's not what I wanted. That's, and then this. Bam. So, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways you could do this. You honestly really could do this different ways. Okay, this is just like to make it simple to where you don't have to keep coming in here and pushing all these things. We're like, man. So now you know the owner is just the player, and then you can actually take that and make it serious. You can just make it private if you wanted. You can just make it private, hide it in the inspector, and then just grab the object as the owner. Because if you have a player, if you have two different kinds of units in the game, and you have one that you want the projectile spawn to be somewhere else, felt that wrong, you know, then you can't. This is just to like let you know like who owns this skill. That's all it's for. So like when you come into here and we'll do this, this is still gonna work. Bam. And we need to go in there and figure out like, hey, after so many amount of times, you know, just hit whatever. So basically if you shoot off into your game and it does not have anything with a box collider, and you shoot in that general direction, that thing is just gonna constantly shoot. Like those will never die because it'll never hit a box collider, but that's just because of the way it's in the scene. You can have it to where it destroys it over time, or just that. So what I'll do is in the next episode, I'm gonna go ahead and set it up to where like the player can have multiple skills. You can just set them in the inspector, and then we'll put them in a list, and then we can loop through the list and actually see which skill we want to activate, and we can go from there. That way we don't have to keep clicking and dragging all the time and changing things. So I'll show you that in the next one. Thank you for hanging out with me so far, and I appreciate the feedback. I hope y'all enjoy it. Thanks. Later.